Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this edition of Monday Night Live, live and uncut with me, Derek Arden. Monday Night Live is where we interview leaders from all around the world on various subjects, including negotiation, influencing, psychology, sales, education, and tonight, the financial world. Welcome to our friend Justin Urquhart-Stewart. Thanks for joining us again, Justin. And
Pleasure, Derek.
I've been reading your Monday morning briefing. Trouble, tariff trouble in Trump Town. I think we should start there, shouldn't we?
Oh dear. Well, the other title I had was "A Break on the Economy" or "Breaking an Economy," and it's down to the basic knowledge of economists. We all know this, don't we? If you put tariffs up, it acts as a brake on an economy. The velocity of money through the economy, the speed of that, is a key measure. And therefore, if you actually put a brake on that, you're going to be slowing that economy. And if you've got a slow economy, which is then breaking further, you then have the chance of getting a recession. And then about an hour or so ago, I was listening to Donald Trump, another one of his clips going out saying he didn't really care if there was a recession. He'll probably not remember that tomorrow. So actually, this is extremely concerning. And as we're talking now, we've been hearing today the commentaries coming from Canada. Obviously, Justin Trudeau's replacement RX, Bank of England leader here. Dear fellow, I kind of got his name already.
Mark Carney.
Mark Carney, that was it. I remember when he first day he turned up at the Bank of England. You would have thought they sent a car for him. He was actually on the Central Line tube train at God, it was about 6:45 or something at Bank Station. And I sort of vaguely sort of peered over my Financial Times and sort of recognised him. So I didn't want to sort of embarrass the fellow and engage him in jolly conversation. But anyway, we both had to go in the same place at the Bank Station, got off. We got to the top of the escalator. I hadn't got a clue where he was going. So I said, Governor, can I direct you towards the Bank of England? I believe you're running it now. He said, well, apparently so. I said, well, you better find out where it is then. I'll show you the right way. Anyway, that's my bit towards helping the Bank of England. Actually got the governor there. They could have sent him a car for the first day, for heaven's sake, something like that. Heaven knows actual security or anything like that, but they don't suppose we bother with that sort of thing at the moment. Anyway, but yes, so now we've got Carney then sort of, really coming out. It was really sort of good, abrasive terms about the tariff issues with the cousins south of the border. And also listening to the governor, I believe it was of Ontario, about the 25% tariff they put on electricity being exported from Ontario to some of the northern states. I don't know the details of that, but 25% on your electricity bill, I would have thought is going to be pretty unpopular very quickly indeed. I can imagine Trump getting extremely ratty about all of that. And one of the comments that was made by one of his assistants a couple of hours back was, we'll have to revisit the agreement on the borderline in whenever it was, 18 something or other, between America and Canada. See, this is just getting into the sort of childish levels of stupidity. And it would be funny, if except for the fact that it's so potentially very serious indeed, it would be funny if you just thought people were just trying it out and see how far they can push it. But when you're dealing with people who, frankly, don't seem to have a full understanding of the implications of what they're doing, and at a time when the global economy is in such a fragile state, not just in terms of growth, but just in terms of confidence as well, then I think we're all quite right to be concerned. The underlying global economy is still growing. It's lower, it's slower, but considering what we've been through, that would be fine. Unfortunately, we're actually visiting this danger upon ourselves. When I say upon ourselves, it is the reaction from one party to another on tariffs going up. Putting tariffs up slows the economy. And if you put them up too much, and if you actually then start a tariff war, then you will end up with a recession. It won't just be a local recession. You see the reaction from the Chinese as well. That could easily turn into something much larger. The only positive element about this is, if it comes to head now, then perhaps we can actually they can sit down quickly and get it resolved, rather than having this carry on for months on end, which would be a complete utter waste of time and money, and frankly, dangerous for all economies. Even more dangerous, of course, given the fact that the only people who are probably enjoying this heartily are the Russians, and who are sitting there sort of gloating after what happened to the premier of Ukraine. and in a position there where they're benefiting from that. And now they're going to be seeing the NATO powers arguing amongst themselves, and particularly, America and Canada. You can't get much closer in terms of bonding there, but threatening the individual nationality and statehood of a country over another. Maybe it said in jest. It didn't sound in jest. I mean, you're not going to get America invading Canada, he says. But you've got someone saying, I'm going to revoke the Charter of 18 whatever. Frankly, anything could happen at the moment. And you can see with the reaction of this on the stock market. I haven't got the figures right in front of me now, but really quite dramatic falls, certainly on the NASDAQ and the Magnificent Seven, not looking quite so magnificent now, as we've seen those tech companies dropping really rather dramatic. You're still well ahead and in the money after how much they've been going up over the past few months. But there will be hopefully wiser heads trying to prevail upon. Maybe it's even Mr. Musk, if that's a wiser head, but certainly the administration to try and actually back off on this. And if it's a negotiating ploy, that's fine. That's if you're a poker player, I'm sure that's how you would go about doing it. But if you're a poker player, the whole point is you're trying to make a bluff go through. What you don't want to do is play fool, fast and loose with everybody's economy. It's too dangerous, not in terms of arms, but just basic people's economic position. Jobs, growth of the economy, the ability to be able to afford food, the cost of living crisis. All these issues are going to be directly affected by this. And so, frankly, it is just stupid. And what can we do about it at the moment? All we can do is try and put calm voices on and encourage our leaders to actually be sensible about this and realize that there are better ways of going about it. As ever, it's called negotiation. Shouting at one another, not even in the same room, doesn't really help very much. Mind you, shouting at one another, we saw Mr. Zelensky and the president and his lapdog next to him as well, Mr. Vance, were literally shouting at each other in the same room, which I just thought was utterly childish all the way through. Again, good theatre, but if you put it down as theatre, no one will believe you. We are in a very strange world indeed. Now, also, add to this what's happening in China. Yet more news of social unrest in China. You can tell the news is coming out because there's nothing in the papers about it. But China is incredibly clever at making sure we don't get to hear about most of this. But significant social unrest in interior. Why? Inflationary issues, particularly with regard to food. Also social issues, because remember, a lot of the rural community has to, apart from holidays, mean numbers of days of holidays, then go into the coastal cities to go and get their jobs. And of course, not only they live in different areas of the city, but treated very separately as well, particularly with regard to the difference in accents and things like that, as we know how prejudiced people can be. It takes small differences to actually wind people up very significantly. So China's got issue over that, it's got issue over the property prices as well. Still, that property crisis is there. We don't get to see much about it, again, because there isn't much public news. But bear in mind, companies don't go bust in China until the party says so. And so therefore, you quite often only hear about companies going bust later on because they've already been restructured and the debt's been placed elsewhere or has been written off by the centre. So again, beware of that. So this, I think, is actually just adding to it. So you go all the way around the world. This is, I'm afraid, for the major powers, not a good situation at all. Russia, of course, is not a superpower. Russia, remember, is a dangerous power. I know I've bored you before, but the GDP of Russia is roughly roundabout. Russia is quite a bit larger than, say, Blighty, but the entire GDP of Russia is 48%. 48% of the United Kingdom's GDP. Just a wee bit of difference there. And of course, it has been shrinking. Population shrinking and net worth are shrinking. Inflation now looking really quite considerable indeed. Interest rates high. And increasingly now there are, despite Russian domestic news, not obviously going into detail about what's been happening in Ukraine, but nonetheless unable to hide the fact that the cost of living in Russia is now significantly higher, where we've seen basic food prices up over 10%, and some of the more key areas we've seen some areas with regard to certain types of bread up 20%. I'm not quite sure how that's achieved, but anyway. Something where I think we need to actually have stay calm with things like this, and not as this is the time to panic at all. What should we be doing in terms of investing? Well, it's pointless selling out of markets when markets have already dropped. But over the past few times we've been talking, as the risk has been going up, taking a defensive position is perfectly sensible. Mind you, defensive positions used to be the days, well, if you weren't going to have equities, you're going to have bonds. And you look at some of the bond markets at the moment, you won't be wildly attracted to that either. So good old-fashioned cash levels, and particularly cash bonds for 4 to 5 years against you paying some quite useful rates of interest, depending which country you're dealing with. But find yourself being suitably defensive at the moment. And bear in mind, for most people with equities, they have a pretty good run. Not just in the indices themselves. Remember, the main gain comes from equities is the compounding of the returns of the dividends going up, and we've seen some extremely healthy dividends. So again, all the more reason to say to people, don't sell out, wholesale sell out, because you've made some profits. You can take your profit off there, but still maintain those markets, because you can't time the market. It's time in the market, one of those nauseating phrases we used to have to deal with the entire time. But nonetheless, taking a bit more defense, because there will be a time where, let's hope, that sound minds get together and we get over the tariff issues. Let's assume that, and markets start calming down, and that'll be a good opportunity to start taking advantage of this, and hopefully buying some stock at a discount. But we'll have to wait and see. It's going to be more turbulent, I suspect, before we reach calmer waters. And I think it's not just this issue. This is going to be over I'm looking at 18 months, 2 years. So I'm happy to actually take a back seat for the time being, let things move, be suitably defensive, but building up some cash, because there'll be times then, if you think like things will recover, and I think they will, then they will be a good time to actually then buy in at a discounted price. So hold hard for the moment, but keep your cash safe by your side.
I was in Germany last week. It seemed pretty vibrant, but we hear the German economy is in trouble.
Well, German economy is just looking a bit old-fashioned. People always go on about Britain looking old-fashioned. We don't make anything anymore. They always keep on saying, but I figure I've said to you before, Derek, we are still the world's 9th largest manufacturer. Not quite sure what we're making, but we're 9th of it anyway. But you hear the politicians going on about car manufacturing and things like that. That's yesterday's industry, and Germany have been really good, particularly their Mittelstand businesses, privately owned, often engineering business. Different attitude towards engineering in Germany. Herr Dr. Engineer, the title, far more respected, where engineers in Britain tend to be regarded as a person in a boiler suit and an oily rag clutching a spanner, so it's never been quite the respect that we've had. And we've never given them here. No, the advantage is actually that Britain has at the moment is a much more developed technology centre and technology developments, which we can measure very successfully by the number of American companies coming over and buying them, which is very flattering, but slightly tiresome if we want to actually grow those companies ourselves. Mind you, it would be helpful if we had something known as a stock market over here. The London Stock Exchange appears to have vanished as far as I can work out now. The company that owns it, actually the stock exchange itself accounts for around about 10 or 11% of the value of that company. They don't really care about it. It's a data collecting organization. They don't really care about the capital raising functions of it. And this is where we do need some proper innovation and innovative thinking in the City of London, and also from politicians as well, to actually make sure this happens, to get these markets to change. And London has to, it's in a good position to be more international, but it's losing businesses at the moment. It doesn't have a good smaller companies market. We started AIM in Glasgow over 25 years ago, and the concept was fine. It worked perfectly well to start with, but the costs are too high now, and they're always going to be liquid anyway, but there are ways around that. I'd love to see the London stock market actually link up with the ASEAN markets, where you actually have smaller developing companies there, provide more liquidity there, and greater international focus, which is what London was always known for. But there's no sign of that happening whatsoever. It's ridiculous, all the way we used to be able to deal with the stock exchange. We all knew who was running the stock exchange, be able to meet them, discuss with them, change it. So now they're virtually invisible. And it's not just a matter of being rather sad and saying, isn't it, oh gosh, we want silly gits and red braces back and bowler hats. No, we don't. But what we need is an efficient mechanism of capital raising, both for domestic companies and international companies as well. And London's particularly well positioned for doing that internationally, and it's got all the ancillary services to go with it. And it'd be a real waste of value for the United Kingdom to let this go. So there are a lot more initiatives and ideas that I've been putting on paper about this and trying to get the Treasury to have better understanding of it. But I think I've bored you before, Derek, with what's happened at the Treasury. We've got perfectly bright people there, recruited the bright people, but without the experience. We used to have days gone by, for those who remember on BBC television watching Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister, the character from the permanent secretary had been there for donkey's years in that same job. Humphrey, exactly. But he'd been in that same position, that same role. The answer was, so therefore he was soused in it. He knew the job, he knew the risk, he knew all about it. Now you go to particular areas, and especially the Treasury, and you'll find no one has been there for more than 3 to 4 years because they get modern HR policies and they get moved on to the Foreign Office or social services or something like that. And so bright people, but without the experience and knowledge. That's not very helpful if you're trying to get some innovation done. And if you go to the City of London and start talking about some of these things, well, at the moment, everything has been focused on private equity and all those it's a perfectly good form of investment, but it's shorter term. You need to bear back and think about longer term strategic investment and also outside London, particularly with regard to things like infrastructure. So sorry, I've been burbling on like this.
No, you're not burbling on. What effect is the GDP increase required by Mr. Trump and NATO in the defense of Europe, which looks quite dangerous to me? What effect will that have on the stock market if we have to go up to 3% or 4%?
You've already seen the impact of that in the past few weeks. In fact, it's something I think we talked about last year. The fact that actually BAE Systems were actually focusing on actually now producing some artillery shells. They hadn't done so for years, and our supply was looking at a little shoddy. Apparently, the blue touch paper had been missing. So what you've seen is defence companies throughout Europe all benefiting significantly, and of course then the supply chain for those defence companies as well. UK well positioned with a few businesses there, but not as, I'm afraid, as strong as we were in it. But it is a joint venture between BAE Systems and Rheinmetall, the German arms manufacturer. And we're going to see more of that occurring. But that's that one particular area, one particular sector. Does that improve the rest of the economy? And the answer is not really, unless you actually see that broaden out into other areas of the markets. And with the current position at the moment, I don't think that's going to be happening for the time being.
How can Russia afford to do what they're doing and threaten, I mean, obviously doing what they're doing in Ukraine, but then start threatening the Baltics and anywhere else that's close by, if their GDP is only 48% of ours?
Yeah, and it's they've done what they've done before, which is they bully, and you bully and shout, and you make people nervous. So you start talking about raiding and actually showing some examples of it, raiding pipelines or communications cables. It doesn't matter whether you actually cut them. It does matter if you cut them, but it's the very fact that people are talking about it and they've seen examples of it just puts more fear into the economy and to investors' minds and to companies. Are they going to invest with that sort of issue? And the answer is no, they'll hold back. The Russian economy is in a terrible state, but can they afford any of this? Well, remember they're sitting on lots of oil and lots of gas. Yes, of course, we put sanctions on them, but there's still enough people who are going to be buying it from India, and also the deals we did with China, albeit at discounted prices. They've got a lot of money overseas. We know they've got quite a large amount in Britain because we've actually then at least put a safeguard on that. That's not going anywhere. And at last, we've actually started to take some action and actually use some of the interest on that money to pay for armaments to go to Ukraine. And it would be interesting lawsuits to come out on that, no doubt, in years to come. But it's actual action then being taken. So we know that Russia's got an awful lot of money stuck because we were heavily into money laundering. Hence the reason you saw so many excellent football companies flying a Russian flag. They weren't doing it because they love football. It was just another form of advanced money laundering, and our regulator knew about it and did nothing about it.
And what about France? So politically, there's been a lot of politicking going on with Trump and Putin and everybody else.
It's not just France, but it's, look at Europe is looking weak. The EU is looking weak because it's got no leadership, and there's no one. But in theory, there isn't a leader. You could say there's a leader of the commission, potentially, but actually, who is the dominant force who's actually trying to push it forward? Well, Macron's been trying to do that. Well, he's always been trying to do it, normally failing somewhat. We had Mrs. Merkel, who was everyone looked up to until she stepped down, and then she saw the damage or the risks that came about from the deal she did with Russia over gas, causing stresses there. But the German Chancellor, the new one coming in, can't remember his name. Just last one, could just about remember his name. I'm afraid you're not seeing the leadership there. And of course, even within the EU, you've got countries like Slovakia and obviously Hungary, who, as far as they're concerned, are very happy to actually still staying close to Russia and rather anti the whole policy towards Ukraine. And the Russians are doing what they've done before, and we've seen it in Georgia, we've seen it in other areas, and Romania is now the same issue as well, with regard to interfering with elections to try and get people who are going to be more friendly towards the Russians on it. Do you then send in people to actually go and check it and evaluate it? Well, yes, they have. We've been through all of that process, but they don't take any notice. Interesting, there's going to be another rerun in Romania. It'll be interesting to see if there are going to be changes this time. Russia will just say, this is just the West trying to fix the elections their way around. So either way, they'll always argue the other way around. So I'm afraid it is it is one of those issues which is adding to nervousness. And we've said before, the one word that runs an economy: confidence. Not a confidence trick.
I was in Romania on a holiday, and the coach driver got caught for speeding, and he jumped out the cab, and money passed hands with the policeman, and off we went on our way. I have a feeling some of that works in that part of Eastern Europe.
Yes, I'm afraid rule of law is an interesting interpretation of things. Mind you, it's a downside quicker way of actually getting someone to pay a fine. You just pay the policeman straight away. Good way around it. No, I'm afraid it's one of the issues I think I certainly had when we had so many countries coming into the into Euroland, let alone coming into the EU. Had we really, and the EU's always made a fuss over this, really gone through and made sure they achieved the correct standards in terms of money laundering, in terms of actual areas of financial skullduggery and things like that. And they were quite happy to wave it through. When you knew full well that Bulgaria and Romania were having some serious issues. And as for Greece, well, they turned it into frankly, an entire profession in its own right.
We got one last question in the box from John Timms, a friend of ours who resides in Paris. He wants to know, what's the key indicator to follow to see a fundamental change in the economic situation?
Two key ones to me. Well, you've got the IMS figures that come out in confidence on manufacturing, consumer spending, and property, and that's done in the US, but also their equivalent GfK ones in Europe. So that's one key element there: confidence in those three key sectors. And the other one is actually going to be the speed of money going through the economy. Actually, the velocity, and if that starts slowing up. And we're beginning to actually have been seeing that change. It varies from country to country. The UK is a service-dominated economy, so consumer spending here is absolutely vital. And if you see that dropping off, manufacturing, which is about 30% of the economy, slightly less, is not such a key issue. Whereas in Germany, actually, it's the other way around. So they do need to see, they want to see that more of that confidence coming in. But one of the key elements to look at here is new money coming in, whether it's domestically or coming in from pension funds, deploying funds, and of course international cross-border investment. And all three of those seem to be quite significantly slower and lower at the moment. So watch those figures and start seeing a turnaround there, not just 1 month, see the trend turning around. That'll be an encouraging sign. But until we start seeing some of these key issues with regard to tariffs, let alone what's happening in Ukraine, sadly, and the Middle East, but still we see this tariffs issue going. Having major powers, major economic powers bickering amongst themselves over tariffs, frankly, is just a waste of time, money. It's destructive. It is destructive. And I'm afraid Mr. Trump is, you could have thought, and had some admiration for him earlier when he was going on about being a disruptor and disrupting the complacency of post-war systems, and whether it's Europe paying more to defend itself. Most people will go along with that, so that's a good idea. But there's a difference between just disrupting and then just being destructive. And that's the stage we've reached to now. And I don't think he actually understands the effect of what he's doing. So it is, I suppose, one of the concerns I've had in his first term. He knew, and we knew. He didn't really know what was happening. He was surrounded by people, but there were some key people in there who did sort of made sure the safety barriers were up in terms of the economy and in terms of defence. Remember General Milley, before the election, which Trump said he won, and General Milley saying no orders were to go out with regard to military control from the president without going via him. And precisely that, to actually make sure that there was some sort of safety control in there. This time around, I can't see that. Okay, what I can see is the president who's surrounding himself by his own people who he thinks he can trust, and other Fox News presenters that don't necessarily seem to have the depth of knowledge and understanding, not actually also getting the level of respect from people overseas, because they look at the CVs of these people and think, well, actually, really, do these people know actually the effect of what they're doing? So I'm afraid this time I'm more concerned because he's got his own acolytes around him, and I can't see the safety bars. And so this brazen-headed political toddler is throwing a lot of toys out on the pram.
Very last question. Brexit. You were a staunch Remainer.
Yeah.
We voted out. Are we suffering from being out, or is it sort of balanced itself out?
Well, certainly financially, we can point to various elements and say the result of trade with Europe having gone down so really quite dramatically. Has it damaged it? The answer is yes, it has. We've had to bend various rules, like the issues for Northern Ireland. And so it has been damaging. Did the EU need reforming? Yes, it did. But we didn't actually have to go through Brexit to see that happen. So we're in the position at the moment, we left the EU and we haven't replaced it with anything. And so you've seen sort of intimations from the Labour government to say they want to shuffle up close to the EU, quite right too. But the big question is, actually do they want to be part of that single market again? That single market as promoted by one Mrs. Thatcher. But the Brexiteers are vehement that we shouldn't do this, because then we'll be kowtowing to Brussels in terms of the trade requirements and standard requirements. No one's quite told them that if you're doing trade in the EU anyway, you'd still have to go along with those requirements. Main issue is really this. We'll have to pay if we want to be part of a customs union, as Norway do, and it'd be quite expensive. Is that going to be worth our while? The answer, in my view, would be yes. Because at the moment, actually, the EU is going to be having more difficulties. It's finding itself financially constrained, and finding itself with the second largest contributor to the EU actually leaving has caused them real problems. So they would like us to be back in, but we're not going to get the deal we had before, complete with a rebate in it, not being in the euro, and given a level of independence of movement. So there is a negotiation to be done there, but I fear the British government at the moment doesn't have enough confidence, doesn't have enough backbone to actually try and sit down and have that conversation with them.
Justin, thank you so much for joining us yet again. I hope you'll come back in a few months' time and update us. I'm sure lots of things are going to happen in the next few months that we'll all be interested in, and we'll always value your very professional opinion. Can I ask members of Monday Night Live to give you the vote of thanks in the normal way?
Thank you. I'm very flattered, Derek. As I've said before, I'm flattered to be asked in, and I know from questions we've had before, this is a bright crowd you got there. Long may it continue with FLM.
Justin, will you stay on to answer a few questions? Just
yes,
one last thing. Thank you so much for your monthly exclusive briefing that I'm able to send out on a Monday. I really appreciate that. And I know
nobody else has got it except I think probably the Brentford Times, which is read by, I think, probably the bloke who wrote it.
Justin, thanks for joining me. Stay on, please, while I just stop the recording.